Welcome to Literature Room series, which is meant to handle the text on the WASSCE, NECO, UTME syllabuses on literature. We begin with a poem on the literature WASSCE syllabus, but first, it is good to know that in treating literature, there are different aspects to look at. One of these aspects is figures of speech. This aspect reveals various features in the poem or in a poem, and knowing the figures of speech gives you an idea about the other aspects like subject matter, imagery, tone, mode, and themes. Now, the poem we'll be treating is Still Arise by Maya Angelou, which is on the 2026 to 2030 WASSCE, NECO, and UTME syllabus. I begin by reading the poem. Still Arise by Maya Angelou. You can write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I will rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I will rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cry? You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I will rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my tie? Out of the hearts of history's shame, I will rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I am a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide, leaving behind nights of terror and fear. I rise into a daybreak that is wondrously clear. Arise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. Arise, arise, arise. Now, the first figure of speech we'll be treating is apostrophe. Apostrophe refers to a figure of speech that addresses something that is absent. In the poetic monologue, which is the poem itself, the personal poet addresses a listener that tends to antagonize her. That is the you in the poem. It takes the form of a verbal standoff where the speaker accuses the listener of prejudice or racism. This direct address to the you resonates throughout the poem. Now, below are examples of this of apostrophe, which gives us an idea of the affront between the personal poet, who is the speaker, and also the you, who is the absent aggressor. The first is, you may write me down in history. Now, in this free-flowing poem, the you there is an address to an absent antagonist or oppressor. You may throw me in the very dirt, tells you the way the speaker is treated by the aggressor. Does my sassiness upset you? Which means that the aggressor is also not comfortable with the success or confidence of the speaker. Why are you beset with gloom? Did you want to see me broken? So there is intentionality on the part of the aggressor, wanting the speaker to grovel before him or her. You may shoot me with your words, a way of the persona being persecuted by the antagonist. You may cut me with your eyes. Condescension and disdain is carried in these lines. You may kill me with your hatefulness, a way of persecution. Does my sexiness upset you? The speaker now gives the reason for the antagonist's behavior or attitude. Now, apostrophe in this poem has revealed a lot about attitude, about mood, and it gives an idea of the central idea of what one of the themes of prejudice or stereotyping is. So figures of speech expose a lot in a poem. Now we move to the second aspect, which has to do with rhetorical questions. The rhetorical question refers to a question that does not need an answer, since it can be inferred from the context of use. In the poem, the persona creates a searching or probing tone by the use of the rhetorical question. It is an inquiry to find the reason for her state of existence within the tumultuous relationship between the I and you. The I stands for the poet persona, where the you is for the accused, the antagonist of the persona. The first is the question, does my sassiness upset you? That is gives a tone of inquiry. The persona wishes to know why the relationship has so much deteriorated. Why are you beset with gloom? It's a probing question to find out why there's this relationship of hatred between the antagonist and the persona. Did you want to see me broken? Reveals the intentionality behind the antagonist. Bowed head and lowered eyes, again an intention that reduces the self-confidence of the persona, that reduces the status of the persona, a more of a condescending situation. Does my sexiness upset you? The effect is carried here on the gender issue. And at the meeting of my ties, it carries the same idea of looking at the status or the racial stereotype of the persona as one that is nothing to write home about. So it's more of a condescending situation. And the poet persona wishes to know, why do you treat me this way? So the idea of prejudice, racial, carried in figures of is this about probability. The next. Now, parallel figurative idea for mention the whole phrase of whether or wholly, or it can be mentally, or it can be interchangeable. But one thing you should look out for is that it always begins in almost the same way. If you look at stanza 1, you'll find out that there's this repetitive phrasal or clausal extension that has to do with repeating a way of resilience, or maybe overcoming a stereotype, or maybe a show of deviance or resistance. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may throw me in the very depth, but still, like dust, I'll rise. A way of showing the emphasis on resistance, an emphasis on trying to re-establish her personality, a more of confrontation, of taking a stance, is reiterated by the use of parallelism. In stanza 5, we have another instance of parallelism. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. A way of re-establishing, of reaffirming has the poet's personal stance, a way of showing that the poet persona is still surviving the persecution, that the poet persona has this indefatigable spirit to move on, a grit to move on, the perseverance to move on. The next is in stanza 6, where the poet persona says, does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds? It's a way of probing, the surprise in the eyes of the persecutor or the antagonist that the poet persona is still living despite all elements of oppression or persecution. The surprise in the part of the antagonist is actually the probing or inquiring question in this regard. We now move to the next figure of speech, which is called repetent. It's a type of repetition, an irregular repetition of words or phrases to reenact emotional state or to emphasize a central idea. In stanza 1, we have, but still, like dust, I will rise. In stanza 3, we have, still I will rise. If you observe, there's an irregular repetition, but it's almost the same. The sense is almost the same. A way of reaffirming the courage, the stance of the poet persona. In stanza 5, we have, but still like air, I'll rise. In stanza 1, it's like dust. You can't catch dust, and dust always rises. And in stanza 5 is air. You can't trap air. There's so much freedom in air that it occupies space. So the persona poet is saying that like dust, like air, I occupy space. You can't confine me in a certain a place or location that I will still rise. And it is a vertical trajectory, one that can not be subdued. In stanza 5, there's a repetition, I rise, I rise. Now the emphasis is that the speaker progresses above the expectations of the antagonist or aggressor. It has a self-reassuring or victorious effect, and the tone is resolute. Now we move to the next figure of speech, which is repetition, and this has to do with the successive use of the same words without change. It also gives the effect of measured flow in instances where it is applied. It can be used for rhythmic effect, something that keeps on going. It gives an idea of progression, a vertical progression of movement, of freedom. In stanza 5, the repetition is a rise. In stanza 7, we have a rise, a rise, a rise. An effortless flow of freedom, of progression, which is positive in this sense. Repetition in the poem draws attention to the implication of the words, and it also intensifies the emotional or imaginative possibilities of the poem and also the poet persona with regards to success. We now move to the next figure of speech, which is simile, and this literary device unifies, two qualities by the use of as or like. In the poem, we have it in the word, but still like dust, I will rise. And as I said in the earlier instance, that the element, the quality of dust is that it cannot be subdued. It rises and it even disturbs the onlooker. The properties of swelling upwards, when disturbed, is an attribute of dust. This is what the persona adopts or assumes to negate the downward trajectory intended by the accuser. The accuser wishes that the poet persona should go down, but like dust, rather it rises. It makes an upward trajectory. Now, shoulders falling down like teardrops in stanza 4 shows that the persona poet is probing further to understand why the antagonist wishes that the persona be subdued. And in stanza 5, we now discover that the persona poet still insists that he will still rise like air, which cannot be confined to a particular space. I will rise. Now, by connecting the images of dust and air to relate to her personality, by doing so, the persona poet seemingly conjures the confidence of eluding the contrived schemes of the aggressor to keep her continuously down. We now move to another figure of speech, which is metaphor. Now, metaphor is a figure of speech that relates the attribute of one thing directly to another. And in this poem, we have quite a number of metaphors. The first example is, you may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes. A way of treating the poet persona in a hurtful or painful manner by way of words or perception. The next one is, out of the hearts of history's shame, I will rise. Now, it re-establishes the inhuman trafficking of slaves from Africa, especially if you're a student of government and you have an idea of the transatlantic slave trade. It gives us an idea that it was a shameful period of world history where black slaves or blacks, freeborn blacks, were shipped to the Americas. I am a black ocean, leaping and wide, whirling and swirling, I bear in the tide, leaving behind nights of terror and fear. I will rise. It gives the idea of also the journey over the sea, the mysterious, the terror-filled, the fearful atmosphere of shipping people forcefully to a destination that they do not know. But despite all this, the poet persona says, I will rise above all the principalities and all the stagnation of history. It gives the atmosphere is mysterious with enormous capacity to expand endlessly. And in understanding the metaphor, we find out that the poet persona is talking about the stereotyping of the persona over time. In like effect of maybe a gunshot, in the first example, shooting me with your words is like a gunshot. You want to get me killed. But despite the hurtful and painful words, which is meant to be condescending, the effect is that the poet persona goes above this. The poet persona is still a survivor. It also alludes metonomically to the transatlantic slave trade between Africa and Americas. The hordes in the poem represents the place of origin and the disrupted populations of Africa. The quality of the ocean in I Am a Black Ocean is overwhelming because it is awesome, it is mysterious, it has this feeling of enormity about it. And the poet persona likens all these qualities to himself, of the ability to be mysterious, to be enigmatic, and also to strive above all odds. The next figure of speech is allusion, a reference to events, persons, places, and things that buttress an idea in a poem. It is mostly based on the impact of such in cultural or historical memory. For instance, the poem talks about, out of the hearts of history's shame, I will rise, up from a past that is rooted in pain. The idea of hearts is Africa, because if you look at the whole world, when you talk about heart, you just talk about Africa, and it gives an idea of the place of initial origin, or the place of initial abode of the poet persona's forebears. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. Arise, arise, arise. The idea of ancestors, the idea of slaves brings us closer to Africa. Reference to slave relates to the historical transatlantic slave trade. Now, the allusion conjures or captures the painful voyage and the subjection of a people to a painful experience. Reference is made to the gift that the forebears seared in the slave, that is, the capacity, the survival traits, the human capital, and the talent, which is a gift to the new land, which is America. These are what make the personal poet believe in rising above all odds. In the next figure of speech, we see the idea of the use of symbolism used in poetry for anything like image, idea, the world, or object that represents something beyond its literal meaning. And in this case, we have things like oil wells, and diamond, and hearts, moons, suns, and tides. And if you look at it closely, you discover that there are many African countries that are blessed with rich mineral resources like oil and diamonds, and even a place to stay. And also, it is a continent where there's the moon, especially in the folktales, the sun, especially in the vegetation and the game, the flora and fauna. It's talked about a rich continent of beauty. And it gives the idea of wealth. It gives an idea of the heritage, a rich heritage of culture, and also the geographical space. It gives an idea of settled life. It gives an idea of peace. The way the celestial affects human destiny is also seen in the words moons, the sun, and the tides. It also represents the passing of time and the passage of seasons, which offers hope and chances to succeed. So we have looked at the figures of speech in the poem Still Arise, and it gives us an overview of what the central idea of the poem is. So make it to the next literature room series, and bye for now.